Sarah Martinez had been counting down the minutes until her shift ended. After 15 years of dedicated service at Metropolitan General Hospital, this Friday evening would mark the end of her nursing career. The pink slip in her locker felt like a weight on her shoulders, but she was determined to finish her final shift with the same professionalism that had defined her entire career. The emergency department buzzed with its usual Friday night chaos. Patients filled every available bed, and the waiting room overflowed with people seeking medical attention. Sarah moved efficiently between patients, checking vital signs, administering medications, and providing the compassionate care that had made her beloved among colleagues and patients alike. Despite knowing this would be her last night, she refused to let her personal situation affect her work. Her supervisor, Janet Thompson, had delivered the devastating news 3 weeks earlier. Budget cuts had forced the hospital to reduce staff, and despite Sarah's excellent performance reviews and years of experience, she had been selected for termination. The decision came down to seniority and department needs, Janet had explained apologetically. Sarah's position in the emergency department would be eliminated, and there were no openings elsewhere in the hospital. The news had hit Sarah particularly hard because nursing wasn't just her job, it was her calling. She had entered the profession after her younger brother died in a car accident when she was 18. The nurses who cared for her family during that difficult time had shown such compassion and skill that Sarah knew she wanted to dedicate her life to helping others in their most vulnerable moments. She had worked tirelessly through nursing school, graduated with honors, and had never regretted her career choice until now. As the evening progressed, Sarah found herself reflecting on the countless lives she had touched over the years. There was Mrs. Patterson, an elderly woman who came to the emergency department regularly with anxiety attacks. Sarah had always taken extra time to calm her fears and ensure she felt heard. There was Tommy Rodriguez, a young boy who had broken his arm and was terrified of hospitals. Sarah had stayed with him throughout his treatment, telling him stories and making him laugh until his parents arrived. The emergency department that night was particularly busy. A multi-car accident on the interstate had brought in several trauma patients earlier in the evening. Sarah had worked alongside Dr. Michael Chen, the emergency department chief, to stabilize a teenage girl with internal bleeding. They had managed to save her life, and she had been successfully transferred to surgery. It was cases like these that reminded Sarah why she had chosen nursing in the first place. Around 9 o'clock, a new patient arrived. An elderly man experiencing chest pain. His wife, clearly frightened, held his hand tightly as Sarah performed the initial assessment. The man's vital signs were concerning, and Sarah quickly recognized the signs of a potential heart attack. She immediately called for Dr. Chen and began preparing the patient for emergency treatment. Working with practiced efficiency, Sarah started an IV line while Dr. Chen ordered an electrocardiogram. The test confirmed their suspicions. The patient was indeed having a heart attack. Sarah administered medications to thin his blood and relieve his pain while coordinating with the cardiac catheterization team upstairs. Her calm demeanor and skilled interventions helped stabilize the patient until he could be transferred for definitive treatment. The patient's wife grabbed Sarah's hand as they prepared to transfer her husband. "Thank you," she whispered, with tears in her eyes. "You saved his life." Sarah squeezed the woman's hand gently and assured her that her husband was receiving the best possible care. Moments like these made all the difficult aspects of nursing worthwhile. As Sarah completed her documentation for the cardiac patient, she noticed her hands were slightly shaking. The reality of leaving nursing was beginning to sink in. She had spent her entire adult life in hospitals, caring for patients, and working alongside dedicated medical teams. The thought of starting over in a completely different field felt overwhelming. Her colleague, Marcus Williams, approached her station around 10:30. Marcus had been working in the emergency department for 8 years and had become one of Sarah's closest friends. He had been trying to convince her to fight the termination decision or look for positions at other hospitals, but Sarah had already explored those options. The nursing job market was tight, and most hospitals were facing similar budget constraints. "How are you holding up?" Marcus asked quietly, glancing around to make sure their conversation wouldn't be overheard by patients. Sarah forced a smile. "I'm okay. just trying to make it through the night without getting too emotional. Marcus shook his head in frustration. This whole situation is ridiculous. You're one of the best nurses I've ever worked with. The hospital is making a huge mistake. Sarah appreciated his support, but she had already accepted her fate. She had started looking into other career options. Though nothing felt quite right, she had considered becoming a teacher, using her medical knowledge to educate others about health and wellness. She had also thought about working for a pharmaceutical company or medical device manufacturer. However, none of these options offered the direct patient care that had always been the most rewarding aspect of nursing. The remainder of her shift passed quickly. Sarah treated a construction worker with a severe laceration on his forearm, helped deliver a baby in the emergency department when labor progressed too quickly for the mother to make it upstairs, and comforted a young mother whose toddler had a febrile seizure. Each patient interaction reminded her of why she loved nursing and how much she would miss the profession. At 11:45, Sarah began her final rounds. She checked on each patient one last time, ensuring they were comfortable and that all necessary medications had been administered. She updated the night shift nurses on each patient's condition and completed her documentation. As she gathered her personal belongings from her locker, she tried to memorize every detail of the emergency department that had been her second home for so many years. The clock on the wall showed midnight as Sarah prepared to leave Metropolitan General Hospital for the final time as an employee. She had said her goodbyes to the night shift staff and promised to stay in touch with her closest colleagues. Walking toward the exit, she felt a mixture of sadness and uncertainty about her future. She had no idea that in just a few hours, her life would take an unexpected turn that would change everything she thought she knew about her career and her destiny. Sarah woke up Saturday morning in her small apartment feeling disoriented and emotionally drained. The previous night felt surreal, like the ending of one chapter of her life and the uncertain beginning of another. She had barely slept, replaying memories from her 15 years at Metropolitan General and wondering what direction her life would take now. Her phone buzzed with text messages from colleagues checking on her. Marcus had sent several messages throughout the early morning hours, still expressing his disbelief about the hospital's decision. Dr. Chen had also reached out, offering to serve as a reference for any job applications she might submit. The outpouring of support from her former colleagues was touching, but it also made her feel even more conflicted about leaving the medical field entirely. Around 10 o'clock, Sarah decided to take a walk through her neighborhood to clear her head. The autumn air was crisp, and the changing leaves reminded her that transitions were a natural part of life. She had always been adaptable, and she told herself that this career change might lead to opportunities she had never considered before. As she walked past the local elementary school, Sarah remembered her original backup plan from nursing school. She had always enjoyed teaching and had considered becoming a health education teacher if nursing didn't work out. Perhaps this unexpected career change was an opportunity to explore that path. She could use her medical knowledge to educate children about healthy lifestyle choices, basic first aid, and the importance of regular medical care. Her walk was interrupted by the sound of sirens in the distance. Multiple emergency vehicles seemed to be heading toward the same location, and Sarah instinctively felt her heart rate increase. Even though she was no longer employed as a nurse, her natural response to emergency situations remained strong. She said a silent prayer for whoever needed help and continued her walk home. Back at her apartment, Sarah spent the afternoon updating her resume and researching alternative career paths. She had enough savings to support herself for several months while she figured out her next steps. But she was eager to find meaningful work as soon as possible. The idea of being unemployed for an extended period made her anxious, especially since her identity had been so closely tied to her nursing career. Around 3 o'clock, her phone rang. The caller ID showed Metropolitan General Hospital, and Sarah's first thought was that someone was calling to ask her to work an extra shift. She almost didn't answer, but curiosity got the better of her. "Sarah, this is Janet Thompson." Her former supervisor's voice sounded urgent and stressed. "I know this is your day off, and I know what happened yesterday, but I need to ask you something important." Sarah felt confused. "What's going on, Janet?" "There's been a major incident," Janet explained quickly. "A chemical plant explosion about 50 miles north of the city. We're expecting multiple casualties with severe burns and respiratory injuries. We're already short-staffed because of the budget cuts, and now we're facing a potential mass casualty situation. Sarah listened in silence, trying to understand why Janet was calling her when she was no longer an employee. I know this is awkward, Janet continued. But would you consider coming in on a temporary basis? Just for today? We really need experienced nurses who can handle trauma patients, and you're one of the best we've had. The irony of the situation wasn't lost on Sarah. Less than 24 hours after being terminated for budget reasons, the hospital was asking for her help. She felt a mixture of anger and vindication, but her primary emotion was concern for the patients who would need care. What exactly happened? Sarah asked. Janet provided more details about the chemical plant explosion. A storage tank containing industrial solvents had exploded during routine maintenance, causing a fire that spread to other areas of the facility. Multiple workers had been injured, and several were being transported to Metropolitan General because of their specialized burn unit and trauma capabilities. How many patients are we expecting? Sarah inquired, her nursing instincts automatically taking over. At least 12 confirmed casualties so far, possibly more, Janet replied. 3 are being transported by helicopter because of the severity of their injuries. The first helicopter should arrive within the hour. Sarah closed her eyes and tried to process what she was hearing. She had spent years training for exactly these types of situations. Her expertise in emergency nursing and trauma care was precisely what would be needed to help these patients. Despite her hurt feelings about being fired, she couldn't ignore her professional obligation to help people in crisis. What about my employment status? Sarah asked practically. I was terminated yesterday. I've already spoken with hospital administration, Janet explained. They've approved temporary reinstatement for this emergency situation. You'd be paid as a contract nurse for however long we need your assistance. Sarah realized that this phone call was testing everything she believed about her commitment to nursing. Was she willing to put aside her personal feelings to help patients who desperately needed her skills? The answer came to her immediately, without any real deliberation. I'll be there in 30 minutes, Sarah said firmly. Thank you, Sarah. I can't tell you how much this means to us. Janet's relief was evident in her voice. Sarah quickly changed into scrubs and drove toward Metropolitan General Hospital. During the 20-minute drive, she mentally reviewed the protocols for treating burn patients and chemical exposures. She thought about the specialized equipment and medications that would be needed, and she began preparing herself emotionally for what would likely be a very difficult and intense shift. As she pulled into the hospital parking lot, Sarah could see increased activity around the emergency department. Additional ambulances were staged near the entrance, and she noticed medical personnel setting up a triage area in the parking lot. The scene reminded her of disaster preparedness drills she had participated in throughout her career. But this was real, and people's lives were at stake. Walking through the emergency department doors, Sarah was greeted by Marcus, who looked both surprised and relieved to see her. I can't believe you came back, he said, shaking his head in amazement. Patients need help, Sarah replied simply. That's what we do. Dr. Chen approached them, clearly under significant stress, but managing to maintain his composure. Sarah, thank goodness you're here. We need you to take charge of the burn unit coordination. You have more experience with severe burns than anyone else currently on staff. Sarah nodded and immediately began assessing the situation. She reviewed the hospital's current capacity, checked on the availability of specialized burn treatment supplies, and coordinated with the surgical team about operating room availability. Her 15 years of experience kicked in automatically, and she found herself falling back into the familiar rhythm of emergency nursing. The first helicopter landed on the hospital's helipad at 4:15. Sarah was part of the trauma team that met the aircraft. The patient was a 35-year-old man with severe burns covering 40% of his body. He was conscious but in extreme pain, and his airway was compromised from smoke inhalation. Sarah immediately began coordinating his care, working alongside Dr. Chen to stabilize his condition before transferring him to the intensive care unit. As they worked on the first patient, Sarah could hear the distinctive sound of additional helicopters approaching. She realized that this was going to be one of the most challenging days of her entire nursing career. What she didn't know was that her response to this crisis would lead to an opportunity that would change her life in ways she never could have imagined. The second helicopter touched down just as Sarah and her team were transferring the first patient to the intensive care unit. This patient was a 28-year-old woman who had been closer to the initial explosion. Her injuries were even more severe, with burns covering nearly 60% of her body and significant respiratory distress from chemical inhalation. Sarah immediately recognized that this patient's condition was critical and time-sensitive. She coordinated with the respiratory therapy team to establish mechanical ventilation while simultaneously working with Dr. Chen to assess the extent of the burns and plan treatment priorities. The woman was unconscious, which was actually a blessing given the severity of her injuries. As they worked to stabilize the second patient, Sarah noticed three figures in flight suits observing their trauma response from a distance. She assumed they were pilots from the helicopter transport service, waiting to be debriefed or to transport patients to other facilities if necessary. She was too focused on patient care to give them much attention, but she noticed they seemed particularly interested in how the medical team was handling the crisis. The third helicopter arrived 30 minutes later, carrying two patients who had been working in the facility's administrative offices when the explosion occurred. They had suffered less severe injuries, primarily smoke inhalation and minor burns, but they still required immediate medical attention. Sarah coordinated their care with the emergency department staff, ensuring they received appropriate treatment while keeping the trauma bay available for more critical patients. By 6 o'clock, Sarah had been working non-stop for over an hour, coordinating care for multiple critically injured patients. Her expertise in emergency nursing was being tested to its limits, but she felt energized by the challenge and the knowledge that her skills were making a real difference in these patients' outcomes. Despite her exhaustion, she moved with practiced efficiency, anticipating needs before they arose and seamlessly coordinating between different medical teams. Dr. Chen approached her during a brief lull in the action. "Sarah, your work today has been exceptional. The way you've coordinated this response has probably saved at least 2 lives." Before Sarah could respond, one of the flight suit-wearing figures approached them. He was a tall man in his 50s with graying hair and an authoritative presence that suggested military or emergency services background. "Excuse me," the man said. "Are you the nurse who's been coordinating the burn patient care?" Sarah nodded, wiping sweat from her forehead. "Yes, I'm Sarah Martinez." The man extended his hand. "I'm Colonel James Patterson, United States Air Force. I've been observing your work today, and I'm very impressed with your emergency response capabilities." Sarah was surprised by the introduction but shook his hand politely. "Thank you, sir. Is there something I can help you with?" Colonel Patterson glanced at Dr. Chen, who seemed equally confused by this unexpected interaction. "Actually, there is. I'm here on a recruiting mission for a specialized military medical unit. We provide emergency medical support for disaster response, both domestically and internationally. What I've seen today tells me you might be exactly what we're looking for." Sarah felt like she was in some kind of dream. 24 hours ago, she had been fired from her nursing job. Now, a military officer was suggesting she might be qualified for some kind of specialized position. "I'm not sure I understand," Sarah said cautiously. Colonel Patterson explained that he was part of a special Air Force unit that deployed highly skilled medical professionals to disaster zones around the world. The unit worked in partnership with international humanitarian organizations to provide emergency medical care in areas affected by natural disasters, conflicts, or industrial accidents like the one they had just responded to. "We were actually conducting a training exercise about 50 miles from here when the chemical plant explosion occurred," Patterson explained. "When we heard about the incident, we decided to observe how local medical facilities handled the emergency response. Your performance today has been outstanding." The colonel went on to explain that his unit was looking for experienced nurses who could work effectively under extreme pressure, coordinate complex medical responses, and adapt quickly to challenging environments. The position would involve extensive training, international travel, and the opportunity to provide medical care to people in some of the world's most challenging circumstances. "The pay is excellent," Patterson continued, "and the benefits include full medical coverage, housing allowances, and educational opportunities. But more importantly, You'd be using your nursing skills to help people who have no other access to quality medical care. Sarah listened in amazement, trying to process what she was hearing. The opportunity sounded both exciting and terrifying. She had never considered a military career, and the thought of working in disaster zones around the world was overwhelming. "I appreciate the offer, Colonel," Sarah said carefully. "But I'm not sure military service is right for me. I've never really thought about that kind of career path." Colonel Patterson smiled understandingly. "I realize this is unexpected, and it's a big decision, but I want you to know that what I witnessed today convinced me that you have exactly the kind of skills and temperament we need. You remained calm under pressure, coordinated multiple teams effectively, and provided exceptional patient care in a crisis situation." Dr. Chen, who had been listening quietly, spoke up. "Sarah, this sounds like an incredible opportunity. Your skills would be perfect for that kind of work." The colonel handed Sarah his business card. "I'd like you to think about it. Take some time to research our program, talk to your family, and consider whether this might be the right next step for your career. We're not looking for a decision today, but I hope you'll give it serious consideration." As Colonel Patterson walked away, Sarah stood holding his business card, feeling like her entire world had shifted once again. That morning, she had been an unemployed nurse, contemplating a career change into education. Now, she was being recruited for a position that would allow her to use her nursing skills to help people around the world. The rest of her shift passed in a blur of patient care and reflection. All 4 chemical plant patients were eventually stabilized, and 3 of them were expected to make full recoveries. The most critically injured patient, the young woman from the second helicopter, remained in intensive care but was showing positive signs of improvement. As Sarah completed her documentation and prepared to leave the hospital, she realized that losing her job at Metropolitan General might have been the best thing that could have happened to her. The experience had forced her to reconsider her career goals and opened her mind to possibilities she had never imagined. 3 weeks later, Sarah found herself at Lackland Air Force Base in Texas, beginning her military medical training. The program was challenging, both physically and mentally, but she had never felt more purposeful in her career. She was learning skills that would allow her to provide medical care in environments and situations she had never dreamed possible. 6 months after that devastating night when she was fired from Metropolitan General Hospital, Sarah was deployed to Southeast Asia to help provide medical care for refugees displaced by flooding. As she worked in a makeshift medical clinic, treating patients who had no other access to health care, she thought about how dramatically her life had changed. The young woman who had been so critically injured in the chemical plant explosion had made a complete recovery and had even sent Sarah a thank you letter through the hospital. The other patients had also recovered fully, and the incident had led to improved safety protocols at industrial facilities throughout the region. Sarah's story became legendary among her new military colleagues. The nurse who was fired on her final shift, only to be recruited by the Air Force when 3 helicopters arrived carrying patients who needed her specialized skills. She often reflected on how losing what she thought was her dream job had actually led her to work that was more meaningful and impactful than she ever could have imagined. Looking back, Sarah realized that sometimes the most devastating setbacks in life are actually redirections toward better opportunities. Her firing from Metropolitan General Hospital had felt like the end of her nursing career, but it had actually been the beginning of a new chapter that allowed her to use her skills to help people around the world who needed medical care the most.